Welcome to the SNIA on Data podcast. Each episode highlights key technologies related to handling and optimizing data.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the SNIA Experts on Data podcast. My name is Eric Wright. I'm the co-founder and chief content officer at GTM Delta and the host for the podcast. And I'm very, very pleased and excited to have Tom Coughlin joining us today. We are going to talk today about a really exciting world of standards bodies where we're seeing great crossover and how innovation is really being driven not just within a standards community, but across communities. So with that, Tom, I'll let you introduce yourself to folks that are new to you, and let's talk all good things around SNIA and IEEE.
Sure. So I'm Tom Coughlin, and part of the reason for doing this is I'm the current president of the IEEE, which is the world's largest technical professional organization with over 470,000 members in over 190 countries. It's involved in standards. It's also has technical societies that govern just about any kind of technology you can think of. They do local activities. IEEE is a major publisher of technical information, and it puts on over 2,000 conferences a year, for example. So it's my honor, my privilege to be able to do that this year. And personally, I've been involved in data storage and memory since for about 44 years, and worked at many companies in this space. And the last 20 some years, I've actually been consulting and doing all manner of different consulting, from putting on conferences to writing reports in technology, and also doing consulting of all different manner. And I've been, in the course of doing that, I've also been involved with the SNIA as a volunteer in that organization. I think it's somewhere between 15 and 20 years. And before that, I was involved with an organization called the International IEEE, which was a trade association for the hard disk drive industry, for example. So I've been involved in as a volunteer in industry trade associations, as well as the IEEE over the course of that time. So I guess I volunteer for a lot of stuff.
You are both prolific and extremely busy, and I really appreciate when you see folks that are driving, people getting part with these groups where we can actually have a lot of volunteer help. And because it's tricky, it's maintaining that balance between corporate support in order to fund a lot of the work we do while maintaining agnosticism across the ecosystem, which is really what was, even within each standards body, an interesting challenge, but then watching how we see the collaboration between the different trade associations that are coming together more and more now. As we see, IEEE has probably gone through many changes in the time you've been involved, as has SNIA. So, how did you actually come to begin your work with SNIA, Tom?
So I've been involved with SNIA, as I said, for at least 15 years. I was trying to figure out exactly when. But one of the things I was involved in was founding the Solid State Storage Initiative back probably around 2008 or so, and or 2007, 2008. And I've been involved in that activity as a leader and participant since, and it's evolved into, I think it's a Compute Memory and Storage Initiative, CSMI, today, and that changed a few years ago. I've been involved in SNIA conferences, participating in conferences as speakers, as moderator. I've done webinars with SNIA, many with my colleague Jim Handy. He and I do a report on emerging non-volatile memory reports, for example, and been, also been, of course, involved in storage things with the IEEE as well, and as well. So those are some of the activities I've been involved with the SNIA. And I've known about SNIA for even before that, before I was actively engaged with it.
How do you find differences in sort of how each of the associations operate, and where you started to see crossover occurring as you were, involved in multiple associations and groups. You were likely started to say, like, I think some of these people should be getting together.
Mm-hmm. So trade associations or, trade groups like SNIA, I think they do valuable work and contributions within their particular field. And they can help in terms of, standards in general help to make manufacturable products that can have competitors and create a real market. And so trade groups, I think, can play an important role that within their industry. But also, I think that there are interesting connections that can be made between groups that create standards, well as whether it's an industry standard or making it an international standard like IEEE does. And there are examples, in fact, of things that have gone on between SNIA and the IEEE that relate to that, and probably future activities that could take that even further.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, as you mentioned. So, IEEE being an international body and likely very different contributing audience. We even find, especially a lot of technology user groups and technology communities, we're very North American centric in general. And so it must be quite a difference in the type of, like, how to prepare to release stuff, because we have to think much more about internationalization and language coverage. How does that work as far as IEEE? And have you seen SNIA having sort of more growth around adapting to more international participants and audiences?
Well, SNIA does have, international presence in, Europe and also in Asia. So there is work going on in there, and I think that there are people from those areas that are involved in their industry standards they do. IEEE, of course, is a big organization, and probably even more international. And we have been doing standards for a very long time, and some of these standards help major define and manage major industries like the Wi-Fi standards and the internet. The standards that make up the function of the internet are all IEEE standards. So IEEE has a lot of experience, and there has been work between IEEE and SNIA on some important standards, one of which is kind of related to sustainability. There's a activity that came out of folks in SNIA that turned into IEEE standard P2883 in 2022, which was on the sanitization of storage devices, so that they don't, particularly, like I say, a big data center isn't worried about user data being recovered from these devices, so that they feel they have to incinerate or burn them. And by not having to do that, by being able to get a certifiable sanitization of the storage device, you can either reuse it or resell it. Someone else can reuse it, or if it is at end of life and you can successfully do the sanitization, then you can recover valuable components from it. For instance, with hard disk drives, the neodymium iron magnet that's used in the actuator has economic value and could be recycled, reused. So I think that was an interesting example, and basically along the lines of creating a circular economy in terms of products made by design engineers, that maybe we can reuse parts, maybe we can extend their life. And this all helps, I think, in terms of sustainability efforts. So that's one example with regard to standards where I've seen interaction with SNIA folks to create a standard with the IEEE, for example.
Especially when we look at sustainability, I'd say 4 years ago, it really came to the fore. Obviously, we saw climate change became a very strong subject, and a lot more around ESG with investing and just general operations. So it was a little bit tough to watch sometimes, especially as, I'm a marketer by nature and a technologist as well. And I found that we were sort of over marketing sustainability as this new thing. I said, meanwhile, there's actually had incredible amounts of innovation and practices that have been developed. Mm-hmm. And we don't often think of it in the lens of sustainability. As I said, like just the fact of data placement and being able to do data cleansing and reuse those devices, even, reuse within their life cycle. But then, as you said, at end of life, can we recover as much as possible to feed back to the ecosystem? So it's tough sometimes because we realize like we've been doing all these things and it has sustainability on it, but not because we were trying to achieve sustainability. It was almost a side effect, but it's encouraging.
Yeah. And there's some things in IEEE. There's something called e-liability, and there's a standard activity that's developing on this. And basically that's creating methodology for certifiable carbon content in a supply chain. So you could, which would allow you to say just how much carbon was used in making an end product by being able to have a certifiable methodology for detecting that throughout the supply chain. So that's currently getting started in IEEE, and certainly I think could be value in the storage industry as in many other industries as well.
And especially if we think of when we started with a lot of development of this stuff, especially like SSDs and such, I seem to recall that there was a lot of skepticism around durability and life cycle of these things. But as we saw innovation happening at the software layer and the management layer and stuff that's all the way down to even just, work with Swordfish and remote operations and overall management, it's such a boost for us to see that we can do more to unexpectedly extend life cycle because of hardware that led to software that led to better hardware. I like it's a bit of a, as you said, a circular ecosystem that it helps to feed back into itself. And then that creates new innovation opportunities for folks that come along and say, hey, I'm not going to develop hardware. I'm not developing, data centers. However, we're really good at managing data removal and data placement algorithms. So when we get into memory and storage in combination, now we see the hierarchical storage again coming to the fore of like, oh, this is actually very important because we can move things at a pace and speed that we couldn't because of other, bus limitations and other things in the past. So that, again, I think extends the use of some of the stuff we thought was probably only going to have a 5 to 8 year life cycle.
Yeah, I think there's means for extending the use of things. The other thing is a lot of these technologies, all these storage technologies, involve the disciplines which are part of the IEEE. So there's hard disk drives, for example, and you mentioned solid state drives. There's IEEE societies that actually have folks in them that design these things, and there's important conferences and activities that they do. Where people talk about the roadmaps and where these things can go. For instance, there is a road mapping activity in the IEEE that includes semiconductor roadmaps out, say, 15 years, which includes, for instance, memory devices, conventional memory devices like DRAM, NAND flash, but also some of the emerging non-volatile memory devices as well. So I think, trade organizations within a technology have value. A lot of that's at the system level and, implementation level in the industry. A lot of the basic technology development happens through people who would be part of these societies, do things in their companies. And some of this stuff would then show up in IEEE conferences and publications, for example. And there's something that actually this week, I'm actually in Greece right now in Athens, and there was a conference put on by the IEEE Information Theory Society. And there was a session there this last Monday that was on DNA data storage, organized by the DNA Data Storage Alliance, which is a SNIA organization. So there's cases here where we're seeing SNIA actually playing a role in IEEE conferences as well. So another example of that sort of cross play that you can see between trade groups and groups like the IEEE. They're based upon technical professions and people that are working, working to create new technologies.
The other thing is the practices and sort of, I'll say, the pillars within, whereas it used to be just simply, we think of it as hardware, efficiency, transport, and we look at SNIA is actually reorganized in what they talk about the different areas of practice, which include acceleration, optimization, transport. And then what was interesting in talking with a lot of the folks is that security was often an afterthought. And what has really developed is that things like cross-pollination between people that can see, oh, there's actually a security opportunity here where we can start to, again, introduce that early into the discussion around standards so that it's not an afterthought and a retrofit for stuff. And I imagine in IEEE is when you're developing a 15-year roadmap, you have to have real good foresight into not just that single line of development, but what else will this affect that will impact that roadmap?
Well, and I think you'll find, that there IEEE has activities that get into security in various ways, from encryption to cybersecurity as well. So, and I think the other thing is you find I'm not the only IEEE members who are also involved with SNIA. There are others as well, and people who work, in these various parts of the IEEE and also have a role in storage and in the SNIA. So I think it's a really vibrant interplay that can, and I believe should happen between IEEE, our standards, and other activities, conferences and things of that sort, and trade groups in those areas. And actually, as IEEE president, one of my big things that I'm emphasizing that we need to develop this year is stronger engagement with industry. And this is an example of that, working with trade associations, trade groups. And part of the reason for doing that also is that IEEE, we get a lot of student members who don't keep them. Many of those students end up working in industry. And so my top priority actually is getting more of our younger folks, say our student members, to stay with IEEE. And I think part of that is playing a stronger role in industry and being valuable to industry and those involved in the practical applications of technology. And I think interactions like those between a trade group like SNIA and the IEEE in all of its different manifestations can be an example of that.
I think that's such an important piece, really, the human element of what we're doing. Maybe if you could think back on how has the people you've met along the way, impacted your own personal career and what you've been able to bring back now as president, to think you've got this beautiful top-down, opportunity to say, let's look across the broad ecosystem, what we're doing today, and pull in years of experience and say, what's next, right? How do you maintain interest and participation for folks that begin in academia, but then they shoot out into commercial opportunities and then often don't find the time to get back and realize there's such a tight link that can really, really help innovation.
Oh, I think so. I think for me personally, the connections I've made through SNIA and also through the IEEE have been invaluable to my career. It's basically what's enabled me to be a consultant, for example, is that the people I know, the people I've met. It also gives me opportunities to be involved in these organizations, to be informed on the latest developments in storage and other technologies as well. And I think that for somebody who works in industry, whether you're a consultant or you're an employee or you're starting your own business, being plugged in to an industry, having contacts, having connections, and having the opportunities to stay on top of what's going on is important to be successful. And so I think being a volunteer and a member of a group like SNIA and a community like the IEEE can be a crucial element in being successful. And I think that people that do that can make more valuable employees, more valuable contributors to society. So by doing some things because you think it's a thing that should be done, not just because you're getting paid, I think has a lot of value to one ultimately in your career. So I think I fully advocate that. And I think part of it is getting younger folks to realize that there is connections beyond just the social networking and other things they do that can be valuable to them, in particular, having personal connections with people, especially people working in their field or in fields that they might want to get involved in the future as part of their career development.
When that's the thing about, I've noticed I've been involved in a lot of open source communities and even early Linux user groups and doing hardware level user groups. And a lot of times I'd be asked, why do you go to these things? What's the value you get out of it? It's because you meet birds of a feather. Really, it's folks that have similar challenges, maybe have come up with unique and interesting ways in which they take on those challenges. And then just the fact that you're in that room, you just find yourself surrounded by people who are like, oh, right, I could potentially help somebody else. And then, as you said, over time, I've found legitimate, really deep friendships with people that I've met through industry. And then from there, then we grow those internal groups. And then career opportunities come up, because that is as people look for, hey, how do I find the right teams and companies that are in the area of study that I want to be, and that I already kind of appreciate their ethic and how they approach things. Just the fact that participation in these trade groups, you can see them act, and you see how they contribute volunteer time as an organization for their staff. And I think that, like, to me, that's just immediately, if somebody sends you to a trade group and doesn't really have great, expectations of ROI, that they realize the benefit is often intangible, but it's real. And that tells me a lot about a company, in that they will send people towards those opportunities.
Well, and the other thing too, and this is something I've been trying to do in the IEEE and basically throughout my career, is if I see groups of people that are doing something similar, or that they might benefit from interacting with each other, I try to connect people. And I think that helps people to be more effective, or at least helps them in terms of expanding their network and the people they work with, and perhaps finding new colleagues and collaborators on projects. And as you say, this could turn into businesses, could turn into things having enormous value to society, and also provide rewarding career opportunities, no matter whether it's making a fortune or just making something that's extremely useful, or both.
That's it. Yeah. So looking at from, let's think of how do we attract new people, or even introduce, growth opportunities for individuals and organizations that are looking at what is SNIA, what is IEEE, and how do I participate? What recommendations would you have, Tom, on what it means as an individual contributor, and also as a company, in what you can do and gain as being a part of both IEEE and SNIA?
So I think part of it is that what is it that could benefit, first of all, benefit the company in terms of being on top of technologies, and in the case of standards, whether it be with the trade group or with IEEE, helping to shape the industry and the competitive landscape. That it also gives you opportunities to find people who might be employers, maybe collaborators, might be employees, maybe collaborators, who know things and can get things done. And I think it's an opportunity. I think in particular that part of the activity needs to be done here, and this is what in IEEE trying to do, is what can we do to bring the younger folks and develop the next cadre of leaders, of those that are knowledgeable and those that are leaders that can help take an organization into the future. And it's something that, again, it's for IEEE, I think it's crucial that we do this for our own survival and maintaining our vitality and pursuing our mission of advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. And for a group like SNIA, I think it's critical for us to stay on top of the latest activities. It's because the younger folks are often tied into that. And giving people a chance to develop their career, their resumes, and leading them to new opportunities so that they get value out of being part of that trade association.
The interesting thing when we look at these, there's they run beautifully as organizations because there's a marketing edge to it of like, how do we evangelize what's being done in that community? But it also opens the opportunity for people who are deep tech engineers, learners, builders, who are introverted by nature. And so I think it's such a beautiful chance to have introverts get together and collaborate without it being sort of forced. And because it's across organizations, when people are there, they genuinely want to be there. Versus like if you're in an internal team thing, you're like, oh boy, we're going to go do some paintball or whatever. Like we try and find ways to excite people about what we're doing in the company, but you're sitting with the same people you sit with at lunch every day. Now you can come to these groups and it's like, if I worked with this person, I would want to sit with them at lunch every day. And now I can for, 4 or 5 times a year, potentially.
We can learn from each other and, collecting people, colleagues, friends, I think is an important part of one's career in development. And, you mentioned that, learning how to, introverted people, a lot of us who are in these professions, they come from more of an introverted nature, more bookish, and I think especially volunteer positions where you can develop leadership skills, you can opportunities to communicate, learn how to communicate better, written as well as verbal. And in general, if you can get people to do things with you and they're not getting paid for doing it, that's a pretty valuable skill and probably translates into, work and life as well. So I think there's chances for us to learn from each other, to find the best methods of how to get things done, or at least different methods for getting things done, for people to develop their own personal style and to be noticed, because being a volunteer gives you an opportunity to distinguish yourself from those that don't do that kind of activity. And the amount that you can do may depend on many factors, where you are in your life. You got a family, you have other responsibilities. Right. But I think it's useful for someone to try to stay plugged in. If you want to continue to be able to grow and be valuable, you need to take responsibility for staying in the game and working with other people, even if your time may be limited. What can you do that could create value, that could contribute to a community, and help to build that association with other people that may help you now and also in the future.
Well, I got to ask one personal question, Tom. I'm just curious because it definitely comes out. You're very people oriented and really seen to have a mentorship mentality in how everything you speak of, whether even purposeful or not. It very much comes across that you want to drive and create opportunity for others. When did you discover that was an ethos that you carried and you wanted to build on, that ended up probably leading you to what you're doing with IEEE and SNIA and such?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I can't identify when or how that developed. I don't know. Maybe it's something I've had for a long time, so I think probably it has been, but I just think it's really important for us part of it is the realization you can't get things done alone unless you got, an awful lot of money. So if you're starting out without an awful lot of money, you basically have to work through other people to persuade them to help you to do things. And I think part of the best way of doing that, if you're paying attention, is listening to other folks and trying to, communicating meaningfully with each other, and so that's I've tried to develop that skill. My wife says I don't have, maybe not as good at that as I should be, but otherwise I try to I'm trying to look at what other people are doing and what the value is. We could be doing something together, or who are people they could be working with to try to get something more done. And I guess that can be seen as kind of a mentorship thing, but I also see it as kind of like, just generally, how do we create our community? Our people, and, even though they're diverse and very different from each other, certainly in the IEEE, it's true. How can we have a sense of community that we're working together to get some common things done and to do the right thing? So maybe that's mentorship. If so, I guess it's just something that's developed. If I do some of that, it's probably, something I developed over time. And oftentimes, of course, through many mistakes and from not doing things exactly right sometimes.
There's a great book, and this is going to drive me nuts, and I'll look it up after, and I'll be angered that I didn't remember who the author was. But it's the idea of like original study in theater, and the title is called "Accidentally on Purpose," and that's such a great way of like a lot of what we do as communities and groups is that we think we're doing things just like, I'm just doing it, and then over time you're like you develop personal patterns, and you realize like, this is actually a thing that I really appreciate. And volunteering and mentoring, I call them sort of like level 2 mentors. They're almost accidental mentors, where just being in your orbit is inspirational, and people see that. And then it's not necessarily a full formal mentor-mentee relationship, but just being in the room, being there at 2-day events and 1-day events. We really just sort of, we capture it through osmosis, all the stuff that goes on. And everybody, when you get back from one of those events, everyone is fired up. Like the excitement that people have ending the day. After a work day, it's like, close the laptop. Well, we're nerds. We open the laptop back up and start doing personal projects. But yeah, you really just want to say, I've got to go back to my team at work and show them what we're doing over here. And it really just does carry throughout the community.
Yeah, I think, and you made me think about IEEE does this big honor ceremony. We have medals that we give out. I mean, SNIA does awards too, for volunteers and people who've made contributions. In IEEE, we've got these big medals like our Medal of Honor. And we have a big ceremony. We did one in the beginning of May in Boston, where we give out these medals and recognize these people and make a big deal about it. And Vince Cerf won this last year, and his partner in creating TCP/IP, Bob Kahn, won it this year, and they were both there. And it was so inspirational to see these two guys still, talking meaningfully and insightfully with each other, after all these years. It was, that was inspirational.
That's such a beautiful thing. I always say we need like an inside the actor's studio for technologists where we can like really unpack some of those stories. And that's also the benefit, I think, of these groups is that you're meeting people where you're new to the industry, but all this history is in that room. And so when an idea comes up, someone could say like, oh, I remember we did this, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 25 years ago. And it really does inform a lot of how we develop new things by having more history. I often worry that a brand new person coming out of college today has no understanding of how they got there. It's just expected. The cloud's there, all these things are there. And you're like, it'd be kind of cool to know the path that got us here because it may inform the path to what's next as we develop it.
Well, I think, I've always been inspired by biographies of people, where, finding out kind of things they were thinking about and how they got to where they were, especially folks involved in technology and science, so I think those are inspiring. And I think, especially for the younger folks, well, for all of us really, but for the younger folks, how do you get a sense of, what can be? And it's fine to remember the old things you've done before, as long as you say, well, we tried that, it didn't work. We tried that and here were the problems they had at the time, it'd be a better response,
Right.
Maybe we should try it again but what would you do about these problems? Something like that. Yeah,
but it's great. Well, and I could say, Tom, it's absolutely inspirational. We could talk for hours, I'm sure, on many things. You're a fantastic human, and you've been such a strong contributor. So thank you for all you've done for the broader tech community and for IEEE and for SNIA. And for folks that did want to get involved, of course, if you don't already know about SNIA, very easy. Go to SNIA.org. You can check out easy ways to get involved as a volunteer. You can get involved in technical working groups and dive in further as you go. It's such a beautiful group of folks. There's more and more events that are coming up, which is great. And as you mentioned, IEEE, lots going on. what's the best way for people to get started with IEEE, Tom?
The general website is IEEE.org. So you can find out there. And I agree. I think being part of SNIA has been very rewarding. I've met some excellent people doing a lot of good work, and likewise in IEEE as well. So, and like we talked about before, there's a value if you're working in industry, there's value in being part of an industry group, as well as part of a professional technology group like the IEEE.
It's a future of opportunity, both at the technology and at the career layer. So I'm excited to be a part of it. So there you go. Thank you very much, Tom, for sharing your story today. And for folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way that they could do so?
My website is http it's tomcoughlin.com. Let's make it easy.
I was funny. I was thinking about that the other day. I remember, like, we were there at the start of all this, and he has to like http:// and people are like, "What is a forward slash?"
Yeah, exactly. That's what I realized.
Yeah. I missed the tilde. That was we taught the world what a tilde was for a few years, and then we got away from it with long domain names now. But awesome. Well, great. Thank you very much, Tom. And for folks, of course, do check out more great conversations like this with the Experts on Data podcast. We've got lots more coming up on the YouTube channel, and get involved. It's an amazing community of practitioners, folks that not just sharing your love for technology, but the adjacent things we do in our lives. In fact, you find musicians, photographers, people that have volunteer things to do in other ways, and you'd be surprised by how much we all have in common when given the chance to be in a room together.
Indeed, the humans of SNIA are an amazing group.
That it is. That is the podcast alone. I would love to title it that. So thank you very much for your time, Tom.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. For additional information on the material presented in this podcast, be sure and check out our educational library at snia.org/library.